if you're not allocating correctly, Bitcoin is just going to go away from you, and it's not going to come back to you so easily. And Bitcoiners have this tremendous advantage of understanding the way that the world is going to work in 20 or 30 years. And if you're not pressing that advantage in one way, shape, or form, you're fucking up. You are fucking up. If your stack is not where you want it, you need to get off your ass and figure out how to turn that asymmetry into 10x the amount of Bitcoin you currently hold. Don't fade the asymmetry, man. Don't sit back and think, oh, it's inevitable, somebody will figure it out. You go do it.
Hey there, I want to ask you for a quick favor. Over the past few months, I've had over 50,000 returning viewers and listeners to this podcast, but over 65% of you haven't subscribed yet. So if you enjoy what I'm doing and you find my content valuable, please subscribe on YouTube or follow me on your favorite podcasting platform. This will help me fuel the algorithm and spread the message on Bitcoin even further. I really appreciate your support. Now let's dive into this episode. All right, AmericanHODL, welcome to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Good to be here. I'm a millennial, so it works.
I know, dude. It works. I think actually, let's just jam. But I think you are a good person to talk to and find some gems that we can like trigger our fellow generational peers with to hopefully dive into this Bitcoin thing.
You know, something interesting about the millennial generation. Maybe we can just start here. Is I don't want to overgeneralize here, but 97% of our generation is just awful, the worst. You know, just total sheep, sleepwalking into oblivion, and that's sad and disappointing. But I think there's about 3 or 4% of millennials who are very into this concept of restoring the world, whatever that means to them, right? And I think a lot of the movements you can see culturally that have been spearheaded by millennials are about restoration rather than about progress. So something as simple that you wouldn't normally think about as like the craft brew movement, right? Like, you know, when we were young, there was only crappy beer. You know, you sound European, so maybe it was different where you were. But in America,
better beer in general, yeah.
In America, we only had crap beer in the supermarket. That was all we had. We had like Budweiser, Miller, Coors. That was it. And it wasn't until, you know, probably I would say late 2000s, early 2010s that we started to get all these micro brews from different, you know, cool breweries, you know, both in America and abroad that were suddenly on supermarket shelves and you could order them, whatever. And that was, you know, this sort of millennial led movement sort of coming out of Brooklyn by these like hipsters who were like, I don't want to drink crappy beer. I'm sick of it. And so there was this movement to like restore the quality of beer making that was spearheaded by millennials. And then you look at things like Occupy Wall Street. That's a primarily millennial movement that bleeds into Bitcoin. Bitcoin is primarily a millennial movement. So yeah, I think that that's the bright spot of the millennial generation, is that while many are still asleep, there are a few that are committed to putting the world back in order, is the way I think about it.
That's why I love your takes a lot about denialism and stuff. Like, that is very real. So yes, people are probably asleep, but I also think it's just really hard to grow up as a millennial.
Yeah.
So yeah, we cannot blame them.
I use that language as a tool to wake people up, like saying like, yeah, you're a fucking loser, you're a sheep. And some people will hear that and respond to it and be like, I don't want to be a loser. I don't want to be asleep. What's he saying?
Yeah.
Fuck this guy, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think your approach to it being nice and kind and warm and compassionate is also a good approach. Whatever approach gets through to people is the right
but
tactic.
We need each other. That's more
it's like good cop, bad cop. But the thing about Bitcoiners and millennials who are Bitcoiners, I think, in specific, is that we have a shared sense of institutional betrayal. So that's like a shared touch point for us, is that at some point we were all betrayed by an institution. So we tried to live according to, the sort of like, I guess, norms and mores of, the boomer generation who raised us. And we found that a lot of the sort of cargo cult engineering that they had passed down to us of just like, hey, get a job and get married and have kids and do this and do that, it just wasn't working. And we were like, why isn't it working? And then, effectively we felt like we were being told one thing and the reality on the ground was something entirely different. And so it felt like a rug pull in that sense. And people say, well, oh, you guys, you're such whiners. Like people had to go to war in Vietnam and the greatest generation had to go to war in World War II or Korea. And you guys just, you sat around and played video games and what happened and blah, blah, blah. But I think for the millennial generation, especially as an American, there was this slow erosion of what we thought the system, the global and American systems that were in place, what we thought they were and how they function. And they all came at really pivotal times. So 9/11 happens when we're in elementary school or middle school. And then the great financial crisis happens when we're leaving high school or we're in early college or early workforce. And then COVID happens when we're starting families. And it's just like, okay, nothing is as advertised. Nothing works how they told me it was supposed to work. And I either have to grieve that and move forward, or I have to remain sort of delusional and stuck within it. And so for me, I was like, okay, nothing is working. So I'm just going to start doing things that people say are stupid and crazy, like putting all my net worth into Bitcoin, because that is working, right? And like everybody outside of the bubble of Bitcoin is saying that we're stupid, crazy idiots who are going to lose all our money. But actually, when it's only once you've stepped outside the cave, like in Plato's allegory of the cave, that you can see clearly that you were stuck watching shadows on the wall beforehand. Yes. And so the people who watch shadows as real life tell us that we are delusional, and we know that not to be the case. I think that's one of the most frustrating things here.
Yes. Very good point. That's also why I think just the personal Bitcoin journey in general is a very spiritual one, because literally what you just described, the people calling us crazy, that is a challenge by itself, right? Like, how do I trust myself? While you're talking, I just Googled characteristics of millennials, right? And we are lazy, blah, 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 but we are focused on work-life balance and addressing social issues. And as you said, like all these big movements, right? Like all these social issues social issues, but also we are curious, right? And we went through all these technology advancements. I really feel that like the millennials are like primed to understand Bitcoin, right? Like the whole idea of fix the money, fix the world. We have the problem. We have no retirement. All that money is not there. There's so much debt. Whatever we save for retirement will be debased into perpetuity in the next 30 years. I calculated today, if you have 100K today, it's going to be like $2,000 in 30 years when you retire. So it's literally not there. So you have to do something. Yeah, just you are primed to understand this.
There's something interesting here, I think, that about the millennial generation in specific compared to the other generations that bookend it. I think it's because boomers existed in an entirely analog world. And even though the digital transformation occurred near the end of their lifetime, they still are analog people who think in analog ways. And they find it very hard oftentimes to operate inside of digital infrastructure. And then if you look at the Zoomer generation, Gen Z, they're pure digital natives. And so they tend to think everything that's digital has always been happening and is just the way things are. Like they're sort of ensconced in the dogma of the internet and the architecture of the internet as they know it today, which is, good for them from an operational standpoint. They're better at operating the internet than almost every other generation, but it's negative for them in the sense that they miss out on the meta level of knowing how the internet is constructed and how it's formed, and that these are human-led decisions. And I think if you look at the millennial generation, those who are tech forward, tech enabled millennials, because I talk to a lot of millennials who like don't spend much time on the internet, and if I use the word like midwit around somebody, who in regular life, they won't know what the hell I'm talking about. They don't know these memes and things. But if I use it with a Gen Z person, they will understand the meme. The interesting thing here, though, is that the tech-enabled millennials understand that this is an underlying architecture that is human-created and human-led. And so there is potential to change that architecture. Boomers don't care about the architecture because they're dying and they want to continue to exist in an analog fashion because that's what they're comfortable with. Gen Z is not aware that this is something that you can push and pull on. And so we exist right in this sweet spot in the middle where we have the most force multiplier the most leverage in terms of affecting change as change agents, because we have one foot in the analog and one foot in the digital. And we're the last generation, possibly ever. I don't want to be too grandiose, but if you think about it, it's going to be continued digital transformation going forward. So everyone will be digital natives and there will be no more analog people. So we're the last people to have a toehold in the analog world. And so I think we do have this sort of, again, I don't want to be grandiose, but I think those of us who realize this have this sort of sacred responsibility to affect change in a positive and meaningful direction. And instead of using the computer as a tool for slavery and bondage, to use the computer and the internet as a tool for freedom.
Yes, in the physical world.
In the physical, in both, the digital and the physical world.
Yeah.
Bitcoin custody is evolving, and while self-custody is important, it has its own risks and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your custody setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated cold storage multi-signature vault, guarded by 3 independent institutional-grade custodians, none of which have unilateral control. Your funds are fully auditable on-chain, cannot be rehypothecated, and can only move or withdrawn at your explicit direction. Multi-institution custody removes the technical, mental, and physical burdens of private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. Bitcoin is money, and as the price continues to appreciate, OnRamp helps you seamlessly tap into financial services like trading, inheritance, insurance, loans, IRAs, and more, all without compromising on security or accessibility. Check out onrampbitcoin.com through the link below and schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team to get to know them and learn more about their offering.
Yeah, and I think Bitcoin is a bridging of the digital and the physical.
Exactly.
The physical and the digital together.
Yeah,
via proof of work mining. Right. So we get this sort of bridge between physical reality and digital reality via proof of work. And, probably there will be many more bridges that bridge back to physical reality. I think AI is starting to look that way with the amount of power resources and computational power needed for these LLMs. But that I think of it like a bridge, like Bitcoin created a rift in space time and different things are able to now walk over the bridge from physical reality into digital reality. So yeah, that's a lot. That's like
no. I love that. Yeah, why I said like physical world is also because, I don't know how that's for you, but I think Bitcoin has grounded me a lot. Yes, you're using the digital world or the digital avenues to spread the message, for example, and learn and all these things. But eventually, if you approach Bitcoin as it's like the ultimate savings tool, create space and time for yourself towards the future to figure out, what is going on here? What am I here to do? Who am I? All these things. I think those things really take place in the physical world or just trying to understand the physical experience that we have. And I think the optimism that comes with that, and that's also, for people that listen and don't know you, if you Google AmericanHODL, Bitcoin is rational optimism, that is my favorite rant from you. You say something like adopting it is something like self-love, an expression of love towards your progeny and stuff. And I mean, that is a very physical thing, right? I mean, you have children. I'm having a baby in a few weeks. That is like the realest thing you could do in the physical world, basically, right? And the fact that you can do that in a conscious way and have, I'd say, less anxiety about the future because you have been able to save, and create space and time to start a family.
Yeah. Did you say you're having your first child in a few weeks?
Yeah, second. Yeah.
Second child. Got it. So when you had your first child, I mean, I'm sure you had a similar experience where it was like your whole life passed through the eye of a needle. And, you suddenly realize like what the purpose of your life was. Like when you're a parent, you don't really need to search for meaning. The meaning is pretty obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you can see it when you look in your child's eyes. And I think that evolution wants us to lodge our genes as far into the future as we possibly can. That's evolution's goal for us. Evolution doesn't care about us as individuals. It cares about our genetics going forward. Right? Evolution is engineered for the whole to continue onwards at the expense of the individual. Okay. Bitcoin wants us to lodge our sats as far into the future as we possibly can. So Bitcoin and human evolutionary survival instincts are a reflexive phenomenon where we can use Bitcoin to ensure that we are pushing value into the future. And if you think about this, this is like the blockchain of humanity. So when you have every generation going back since the beginning of time has been given more than they were given. They've pushed forward more than they were given, right? That's the reason why we don't live in caves and why we don't have to fend off saber-toothed tigers today, is because our ancestors gave us more than they were given. And that's the implicit, sort of contract between generations in the blockchain of humanity. And I think that if you look at like the transition from boomer to millennial, we kind of threw an error in the blockchain of humanity because of fiat currency. So suddenly there started to be this new idea that we're going to like live now at the expense of the future and sell our children into debt slavery. And like, we'll figure it out because of deflationary technological progress or infinity immigration or some sort of fiat money printing game that erodes GDP in a soft default type setting. Like all these ideas are abhorrent. They're anti-human. They're anti-progress. They bring us backwards, and we don't have to accept that, right? And so I don't accept that. And so when I do think about setting the world right, pushing value into the future, I think it starts with me. And I have to believe in myself, believe I have a future, so that I can believe I can create a future for others, and then they can create a future for others, and so on and so on. And so, yeah, I mean, loving yourself really is radical and transformative in that way, and not giving into nihilism, because that act ripples outward into eternity. What we do in life echoes in eternity in a very real and meaningful sense, not in a metaphysical sense, in a literal physical sense, you know?
I don't know if it was Greenpeace that started with a better world starts with yourself, but it's so funny that it's so corny and so true.
And then they ended with Skull of Satoshi. So they're not doing so good nowadays.
Yeah. I'm thinking about what you said, this drive towards creating this progeny and then realizing that the life is not about you, just having a child. In general, I think is also a very spiritual experience that you get to manifest another human into the physical world is insane. I had to think of that social part there. It's like you're obligated to do that, right? Or it's asked from you in this biological way, this urge that we have. And when you compared it to Bitcoin, I had to think about, well, actually Bitcoin urges you to contribute to it, to like follow the rules because everyone else is following the rules, right? Like there's like an unwritten social contract in Bitcoin where if you follow the rules, you will be able to gain value from what Bitcoin can give you. And yeah, that is enforced, air quotes, enforced in a certain way, but in a very positive way. Like, yeah, you're forced to follow the rules or else you cannot take any value from it. And I like it that you can try to game the rules, but that you will never get any value from it. But that in Bitcoin, it's not really possible to game the rules, but in the fiat world, it is, right? And so you see that by gaming the rules, by corrupting the system, there are now actually people that don't have children because they aren't able to, right? Or they have this very nihilistic outlook towards the future. And when I think about that, I think it's a very sad thought that something that is man-made and just created, right? Fiat money system and all these things that could help it keep it afloat, basically mess up this biological human behavior of procreation. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that, I felt like, wow, that is the size of the battle, I'd say, that we are in, right? Because I mean, I wonder how you feel about it, but sometimes I think I don't know if I would be this chill without Bitcoin if I didn't have Bitcoin right now. Well, maybe I would also be very nihilistic.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And I think that people who aren't in Bitcoin might not know this. Also, if you're not in Bitcoin, you're probably not watching this podcast. But if you are, like, you might not know this.
I hope to find new people.
When I go out and talk to regular friends who are millennials, because that's my cohort, my peer group, the conversation is always very, kids are expensive. It's hard. Things are hard. Well, we think we want to have 3 children, but we're just going to stop at 1, because we just don't know if we can afford it. Or she wants to have another one and I don't. And it's because of, the money and this and that. And then I talk to Bitcoiners. I go to Bitcoin, parties or meetups or whatever. And Bitcoiners are like, oh, what's up, dude? Oh, you're having another? That's awesome.
Yeah, they're all pregnant.
Right. Everyone's pregnant. Everyone is having kids. Everyone is excited about the future. Bitcoiners are comparing numbers of children. They're like, oh, how many do you have? You have 3. I have 4. Oh, I need to catch up to you, whatever. Which is just this when you think about it from this perspective, okay, I'm not judging anybody who doesn't have children because first of all, some people can't have children, but I do think it's a mistake if you can physically and biologically have children to not have children. And the reason why I personally think that's a mistake is because when you don't have children, as you age, everyone that dies, okay? And your partners are going to die, your spouse is going to die, your lovers, your friends, the people around you, and everyone will just slowly decay and die. And so the entire world is just eroding in front of you, even if you live to some very old age, right? Whereas if you have children, then they have children and they have children. And you're going to be around to see all these different generations and, life begets life. And so you're an important and integral part of the story of the generations that have come after you. You're not just some person who lives in a care home who has to be taken care of by, some care worker. Right. Yeah. Just some random, probably a person who doesn't even speak your language because they've been imported in from a different country so that them and their children can have a better quality of life. Right. So that's a very sad idea and sad thought to me, to be constantly surrounded by death. Whereas when you're surrounded by more life going forward, you're more engaged in your own life and the life of others, and you're more connected and present. And people say, well, I can do all that without being a father or a mother. And I just personally don't know that you can, or that I think it's very difficult, and maybe 0.1% of people could feel okay without doing that. But for me, I think the average person, 99.9% of humanity, needs to engage in that to have meaning in their life, because it's the most important thing you can do, is to push value forward into the future, push knowledge, push value. Everything I see that's about child-free life or whatever is people drinking in different locations.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I went to Hawaii and I drank. And then I went to Thailand and I drank. And then I went to New York and I drank. And then I went to Paris and I drank alcohol. And it's that's meaningless, dude. That's a totally meaningless existence, and empty and vacant. And you're numbing yourself and you don't realize it. And when you have children, you think to yourself, all I want to do is stay at home and play blocks on the floor. It's a much more powerful feeling. And I think that people that don't have children, when they have the ability to, I'm not judging people who don't have the ability to, but if you have the ability and you choose to forego it, I think you're going to end up in massive regret. And I think it's going to create a societal contagion as well, where especially women who don't have any children. My wife said this to me the other day, and I thought it was incredibly profound. She said, women who don't have children will make other things their children. They will make immigrants their children. They will make their dog their children. They will make, other people's kids their children. They will be teachers and attempt to indoctrinate other children, et cetera. So it's I think that mothering impulse is still in you, even if you choose not to have children. And it comes out oftentimes in ways that are, deleterious to the social fabric.
Yeah. I also think when you have children, you're also constantly confronted with yourself, right? Or your level of development as an adult, as an individual, your spirit, however you want to define that, right? And it's, I feel it's another chance to learn. Sometimes there are these moments where I realize, oh, this is something I missed along the way. I'm learning this now, right? Hey, this is not how I want to behave. I want to do it in a different way. And that is growth by itself. And I'm thinking about, I talk a lot about fiat money system forces you to be a consumer, right? And a Bitcoin money system invites you to be a builder. And I think just having children, building a family, or helping to build a literal person, an individual, right? For them to be self-sufficient later in life when you are dead, right? That is the highest thing that you can build. And Yeah, I agree with like the search for substitution. I mean, it makes sense if this is an innate urge that people have. Yeah, then something like that will happen. But as you said, like people who are traveling and drinking, think, yeah, you're being a consumer. You're being the good boy or girl, and you're being the consumer. You're fueling the thing that took this other thing away from you. Basically, that's crazy.
Me and Walker were talking on his podcast about the same kind of thing, about fatherhood, et cetera. And, there were like a couple of comments who were like, oh, look at the Bitcoin bros. They think they're the first people to discover fatherhood. Oh, well, good for you, bunch of think boys, whatever. And it's like, listen, man, this is primary to the whole reason why we're here is because we care about the next generation, and the generation after us will care about that generation and subsequent, and it goes on forever. And I can't think of anything more primary or better to spend your time and your life and to have conversations about, rather than trying to, extol the virtues. In some sense, I think that Bitcoiners just give basically the same advice that your grandma would give you, which is like,
probably.
Right? Like, save your money, go on walks, get more sunshine. You should be eating more meat. You should eat healthier, spend more time with your children, be a good father. Like, these are like, start a garden, get to know your local community.
These are very radical thoughts nowadays.
Well, that's what your grandma would have told you, right? That's what my grandma told me. And so in some sense, I feel like I'm just an old grandmother extolling this advice. And people are like, oh, what a right-wing radical you are, or whatever. It's like, dude, this is grandma shit. This is grandma shit. Okay.
Yeah. So do you have any ideas about like, what are kind of like the mechanisms or like cultural ideas or maybe like superstitions or something that like about money that influence how people behave nowadays?
I think in no small way, the wealth of America today is significantly reduced. I don't know a number or a figure I could put on it, but my guess is there's like a 2 or 3x miss here because of the stock market crash of 1929. So because of the Great Depression, which followed the crash in 29, our grandparents' generation in America were raised with just an extreme distrust of the banks. If you think that Bitcoiners distrust the banks, man, my grandmother hated banks, hated investments, hated stockbrokers, hated anybody having control of her money. She wanted to keep all her money under the mattress where she knew it was safe. And they had hoarding behaviors because of the things that went, for food and for resources, et cetera, that were hard to find during their childhood. And so that behavior affected the way that they saved and invested throughout their life. And I think that there's some large portion of the American stock market that's missing because our grandparents had that mindset. And then that was such a significant trauma, the Great Depression, that it fed into the boomer mindset, and only about half of the boomers were able to kind of get out of that mindset and begin to start realize that they were in a different place and begin to start saving and investing for their future, mainly in equities and bonds, et cetera. And then I think the millennial generation is the big myth that we believe is that the stock market is still a good place to save your money, to invest your money. And while the stock market is doing well, it's not doing as well as Bitcoin. And so we actually have I think Michael Saylor coined this, and I think it's correct, which is the fiat standard had multiple stores of value in different eras. The first was gold. So if you look at when we divorced ourselves from the gold standard, gold acted like the store of value all throughout the 1970s and went on sort of a crazy bull run. And the second one was bonds. So we went from store of value was gold to bonds. And that was probably like the 80s, 90s into the early 2000s. And then coming out of the early 2000s was equities. And equities acted as the default store of value and still do for most of the market today. But if you're smart and you're forward looking, you're going to realize that equities have ceased to function as the default store of value, and Bitcoin has taken their place because Bitcoin is sort of this infinite container for wealth. And so I think that, the big myth that the millennial generation believes is that the stock market is giving you a good return, when actually, if you look at it against all of the monetary inflation that's taken place, your returns aren't shit. Like, everybody in my neighborhood thinks their house is up a tremendous amount of value, but because I'm a Bitcoiner and I have a different economic lens by which to view it, I realize that my house is actually down tremendously in Bitcoin terms. So by owning my house, I've actually cost myself 80% in Bitcoin terms, but everybody else in the neighborhood thinks they're up 100% in fiat terms. And they are in fiat terms, but it depends on what you're measuring with. So yeah, that's the big myth.
Quick question. If you have your Bitcoin in self-custody, where are you keeping your Bitcoin seed words? For me, there's only one way, and it's backing up my seed phrase with stamp seed. It's a single durable plate without any parts or materials. Stamp your words into solid titanium, which is fire-resistant, water-resistant, and built to last. Unlike etching or engraving, stamp seed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, making it easy for you to protect your generational wealth. Don't risk losing your seed phrase on paper. Get a stamp seed plate for unmatched protection. You can use code BRAM, that's BRAM, for 15% off at stampseed.com.
Yeah.
Do you think that's also the biggest red pill that people need to take before they can orange pill themselves? Or do you think the red pill is something else?
I think money illusion is really difficult to overcome because fiat is the dollar and fiat currency in general is sort of a dogma. And the best way to explain what a dogma is there's this David Foster Wallace story where he says that two young fish are swimming along and an old fish comes by and says, "Good morning, boys. How's the water?" And he leaves and one of the young fish turns to the other one and says, "What the fuck is water?" Right? So that's dogma. It's all around you. It's the system that pervades your life that you don't even notice is there. And that is the United States dollar. That is the euro. That is fiat currency, right? And so I think that it's like you're a fish and you pop your head out of the water and you finally take a look around for the first time in your life and you realize, holy shit, there's a whole another world out there. And I was just a fish who had never left the water before, you know?
So how can we talk to, I wrote down the normies, but like the people that have the problem, but they don't see it. And I wanted to give an example with that because I was in the States in October, and I arrived late in the evening, and I went to my hotel room and I sat there and I had some dollars in my pocket, and it was so funny because I was just sitting there with these dollars. I was like looking at it and I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Like I think about this a lot. I talk about this a lot, but now I'm sitting here and I have them in my hand. And then I read, there's like this little text on the bill, and I just Googled it, so I'll read it. It says, "This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private." And I was sitting there and I was thinking like, they literally tell you that this piece of paper is worth nothing. It's an abstraction of something else that is in some ways an abstraction of another thing, Yeah. So even if it's staring you in the face, how do we talk to people? How do we get them onto this, not even a Bitcoin train, but just like, this is the cave you're in train?
So first things first, the thing that backs the US dollar is violence. The United States Army can put a Hellfire missile in your room anywhere you are on Earth within 2 hours. So if you don't do what we say, we kill you. It's pretty simple. In terms of how to talk to people, I have struggled tremendously with this because, I think that you have to, you ever see the movie Slumdog Millionaire? You know that movie?
Long time ago.
So just to refresh your memory here, the basic point of the movie is that there's nothing exceptional about the guy who's on the game show. It's just that coincidentally, his entire life led him to all of the correct answers on the game show. So it's like, it's destiny, right? And it's like a story about destiny. It's a good movie, by the way. But I think that in some sense that we all, those of us who are in Bitcoin now, have these Slumdog Millionaire moments in our life where if you look back, there are these cultural touchstones or these inciting incidences where you started to wake up. And I think those are different for everyone. For me, I have 3 of them that are easy to point to. My grandfather used to tell me about, he was stationed in Casablanca during World War II, and he used to tell me about the gray market currency trading that went on there. And he had a GI friend who made a lot of money doing illegal gray market currency trading. And I was like, wait, so you can just exchange money for different types of money and make money? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, why didn't you do that? And he was like, I don't know. I should have. That was his answer. And then my other one was SETI, which is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence at home. That one taught me a big time about Bitcoin, because if you don't know, SETI was like a way to use your dormant computer power, your CPU power, to search for extraterrestrials, right? And it was a decentralized network of, CPUs around the globe that were all searching for ET. And as a, 10-year-old, 11-year-old, I thought that was like really fucking cool that my screensaver at home was, searching for extraterrestrials. And I would like race home and be like, did I find it? Because everybody wanted to be like the node in the network that found it. It's the same thing as like finding a block, right? So that was another touch point for me. And then my third touch point was I was in college, the first year of college, when the great financial crisis hit, and I stopped going to school entirely. I spent like 3 weeks just glued to CNBC and just basically being like, wait, what's happening? What is happening? Nothing works as advertised, and then a little while later, like Occupy Wall Street happened, all that kind of stuff. So those were my internal touch points that helped me understand Bitcoin. And I think everybody has those in their own life. I don't think there's any kind of combination of words I can say or tactics I can use in order to wake people up. I think that like you're going to be woken up when you're going to be woken up. And for many people, unfortunately, it will be much later and they won't be able to capture as much of the opportunity here, which, is fine. Like, I think that's why we as Bitcoiners are always trying to figure out how we can orange pill the people that we love, because that's like our way of saying, I love you back, is trying to help you get in position to figure out this opportunity so that you can massively take advantage of it and improve your life. But the truth is that most people just aren't ready for that level of, friendship or love and support or, I don't know what, like they don't want to hear it. So for me, I've tried take it from me. I have tried every tactic under the sun. I have been as nice as you can be to a person. I have been as mean as you can be to a person. And I've been everything in between, and nothing works. The person's not ready to wake up. They're just not ready to wake up.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I think the insights come after you adopt it and do the work, and like why you do the work is a very personal thing. I think I don't know if you ever looked at these personality, like the Myers-Briggs thing.
Yeah. I'm ENTJ.
Yeah, me too. But this is like 23% of all the Bitcoiners are INTJ, but only 20% of all the people or something or less are,
I think it's like 3%.
Or less.
Yeah. It's a very low percentage for ENT and INT.
2.1%. Holy moly. So
it's very low.
We are also lucky that in some way, this is how it turned out.
And ENT, by the way, for anybody who doesn't know, NTJ is just intuitive thinking and judging. And then the E or the I is just introverted or extroverted. So I tend to be more of an extrovert. A lot of people are introverts. So that's all it is.
Yeah. The outcome after doing the work is only something you can see after you do the work. So you cannot use the outcome to pitch that as the input for another person, right? Like that sounds too good to be true. That sounds like a snake oil salesman, right? Like imagine if you adopt this thing, you're like super positive. You want to make babies, like you'll be wealthier and all these things. Like that just sounds too good.
It sounds
right?
crazy.
Like that. Yeah. It sounds crazy.
And I think unfortunately a lot of people don't want to hear it from us. They want to hear it from some voice who seems familiar and authoritative. And we probably seem like stark raving lunatics, and we don't seem that familiar or that authoritative, because we're, like you just said, like most Bitcoiners have a personality type that's shared by like 2 or 3% of the population. So we kind of are weirdo outliers. And then not on top of that, we're not authority figures at all. In fact, we're anti-authority figures, right? So it's very difficult for people to take it seriously from us. Maybe if I threw on a suit, they would take it more seriously, but they're not going to if it's like a dude in a backwards baseball cap, who's swearing liberally throughout the podcast interview.
Yeah, I agree. I did write down like 2 things to maybe attempt. I think I'm a pretty like risk averse person, and previously would have defined myself as like a control freak. I think it's less now because I understand what I was trying to do by being a control freak, but also, and what that brought me, but also what I missed by being that, changing that. But, the risk averse thing is super interesting because I feel that Bitcoin is like the least risky thing that I can own towards my future. And that realization I've tried to use a lot, as in, like the future is uncertain. I love how Safety Namus talks about this. Like the future is uncertain for everyone. You don't know how much time you have. You don't know when you die, etc. So you generally have anxiety about the future, and all the choices you make in the now either add to the insecurity or lower the insecurity, basically, right? So the job you have, or the study you do, or the person you're with, whatever the choices are in the now, they contribute to your perception of the certainty or uncertainty, a level towards the future, right? And yeah, we talked about millennials. Like my experience after adopting Bitcoin is that, I'm less of a control freak. I feel like I'm not taking that much risk because I know I did the work. So what are your thoughts about like the risk involved with Bitcoin, or is it a risky thing? Like I try to use that as an angle and like this little illustration to people and say like, hey, I like literally improved my life and my perception of how I live my life by adopting this.
So I think the way to think about this here is that Bitcoin is not volatile, right? It's perceptually volatile because we price it in USD or in fiat. And so that perception indicates how many market participants in the world understand Bitcoin for the long term. And we can see that more long-term hodlers are being added every day, which means the floor price of Bitcoin is is higher than it's ever been before. But there are still people, the price is set at the margins. And the weird thing here is that the Bitcoin price is set by people who are brand new and don't understand it. So we are always at the mercy of people who are brand new to Bitcoin and don't understand Bitcoin. And those are the people who are setting the price. So it seems that Bitcoin is hyper volatile when measured in fiat currency. But if you look at Bitcoin in its intrinsic state, like on chain, Bitcoin is one of the least volatile things in existence. Bitcoin does what it's supposed to do. Every 10 minutes, it creates new blocks and it marches forward with the exact known supply issuance curve and total available supply, the exact market dynamics that we know, and with this secret sauce of the difficulty adjustment, which helps set the hash rate. So I think when you think about, is Bitcoin risky? I think you have to get over this delusion that you can live your life without risk, because that is fake. It doesn't exist. You are risking something every day when you get in a car to go to the supermarket, when you get on an airplane, when you get on a train to visit a friend, when you walk down the street in your neighborhood, when you go to sleep at night, your house could burn down. There's risk everywhere around you. We live in this dark forest of infinite risk, and we're swimming in it. And because we're swimming in this chaos and this volatility, it feels bad. So we don't want to feel that. So we convince ourselves that things are static, or that there are things we can do in order to provide safety to ourselves, right? So if you think about somebody who takes a job, for instance, your upside is basically capped. There's only so much money that your employer is going to pay you, but your downside is unlimited. You can be fired from that job at any time, right? People don't like to think about their downside being unlimited, but it is. Whereas if you're an entrepreneur, you work for yourself, your upside is now, your downside is still unlimited. You can lose all your money, make nothing, but your upside is now also unlimited. So I think that you need to open yourself up to sort of the boundlessness of possibility and embrace the volatility, the chaos, and the risk that's inherent to life. Michael Saylor has this thing he's been saying about MicroStrategy stock, where he says volatility is vitality. And yeah, I mean, to live a full life, when you watch a movie about the hero of a story, you see somebody who goes through the trials and tribulations of the hero's journey, and it's an epic quest. And there are moments along the path where it looks like all is lost and they're about to die and fail their mission, right? But then somehow they find a way to persevere, to make it through. And we love that story. That's so, across all cultures on earth, we can't help but relate to that story. But then in our own life, we don't take the steps necessary to be the hero. The hero has to face up to risk. He has to look out at the landscape and look into the abyss and say, well, when you shout into the void, it's just, to me, there's no other way to live. And yet I would say the vast majority of people believe that living that way is the most dangerous and reckless and irresponsible thing you could possibly do.
Yeah.
I just completely disagree.
It's funny because that came later to me, and in a very rational way. What you mentioned, I think taking a job or being an entrepreneur, just in general, the outsourcing of responsibilities to other people that also have no fucking clue what they're doing. As anyone, like no one has a clue what they're doing. Like everyone is winging it. I always say, right? Like we're figuring it out along the way. So some areas in your life you are outsourcing to other people who are also figuring it out. And then you're, I don't know, blindly trusting that everything will be okay as advertised, let's say. But it's the same as with a so that's what I mean with like put your money in the bank, and like you spend your finite time and energy, you get money, you put it in the bank, and then it's not yours anymore, right? So you like outsourced the security, usage, all these things of the reward you got for your time and energy. And the same is with a job, right? Like you outsource that. Like if a CEO dies or the founder dies or whatever, or something happens with them or they are a fraud, yeah, you also lose your job. So I love what you said about like the downside is infinite. But once you realize, yeah, I can also just take on those responsibilities and not outsource them anymore and see if I can figure them out for myself, like make them work for me, then yeah, the upside is however much work you put in, basically, or want to put in. I think that part of that outsourcing the responsibility or just realizing like nobody's coming to save you, like stuff like that. I just had like one point where that like hit me, where I was just like, well, how do I even verify that the person that I outsourced this to has a clue what they're doing? Right. Or that the person that instructed them has a clue what they're doing? Like how would you even go about that? You know? And then I think when you think about money and saving and this, like I expend my time and energy, I get a reward, I want to save it. That is just like almost the biggest thing that you could do for yourself, because everything emanates from money, or like everything is downstream from the money, right? So if you decide like, hey, I want to, the classic Bitcoin tagline, like be your own bank, that is a huge undertaking. Yeah. I realized later. And I think that is also pretty daunting for people that when we talk about that, like we're saying like, hey, do the biggest, most scary thing that you never thought about in your life. You should do that because then your life gets better,
Dude, I mean, when you send your first Bitcoin transaction,
I'm sweating.
Yeah, you will feel afraid. Okay.
Yes.
That was a weird thing. I wasn't expecting to feel afraid when I sent a transaction. And then I sent it, and that feeling of fear switched to a feeling of empowerment when I had sent it appropriately, right? And it was very similar to learning a dangerous skill, like riding a motorcycle, flying an airplane, or being able to shoot a handgun, something like that, where you're scared of this thing at first because you understand how dangerous it is. And then once you get some sort of mastery or control or comfort with it, then you feel powerful because you are in control of this very powerful and dangerous thing, And so that's something that is surprising in the Bitcoin journey. And even there are people that own Bitcoin today who have not yet taken like self-custody of their Bitcoin, right? And I think that they should, because the way to do it, or the way to think about it, is like a skill, like driving a car or an airplane or something, where, it's sort of dangerous and sort of scary, but there's a list of procedures you can go through, and there are people that can teach you how to do it. And you can go slow. When you start driving a car, you start out in the parking lot. You don't start out on the highway, right? So you go slow, and you take baby steps, and you move up the chain a little bit at a time. So you can start, like, let's say you have, $100,000 worth of Bitcoin. You have one Bitcoin. You can just start with $1,000 and try and secure your $1,000 and, get better at it as you go and start increasing your skill share here. And you're going to feel more powerful when you do that. And then that feeling of power is going to lead to the sense that you're in control of your own life and that you don't have to rely on other people. And that is the beginning of true freedom. You can really be free in your heart and in your mind when you have the skills and the technologies that enable you to be free.
I think that's great advice. It's like, that's a holy shit moment, don't you feel? Like that's a big aha moment.
Big
like,
time.
Whoa, this actually works. And I used the illustration kind of when like text messages came out.
Yeah.
I don't know, it was like 10 or something or 11. And we had a mobile phone. Like I had a mobile phone very early. And then we were like on the football field. And we would send text messages to each other, like from one side to the other. And we would imagine this like invisible package or message like flying through the air and like landing in the other phone, which was just a mind-boggling experience. And what Bitcoin can bring us is that experience is very profound. Like, yes, I have value now. I can just send it to you, and then it's literally gone here, and it's now with you, and you can verify that it's not just a number on the screen. Like with everything else. Like this is almost. I wonder what you think about this, by the way. It's almost tangible, but it's digital, which is weird. Have you ever thought about this? Like, I think Bitcoin is actually like the first tangible digital thing, but I still find it hard to like explain it. Yeah. Have you ever thought about this?
I think I kind of talked about it earlier, which is it's that bridge between physical and digital reality that sort of ripped a hole in space-time where, because of proof of work mining, there is actual real energy directly tied to Bitcoin securitization. And so Bitcoin is this sort of energy currency. And, a private key is just a string of letters and numbers, right? But you can physicalize it by putting it on a piece of metal or, your seed words, which are an abstraction of your private keys. You can put them on a piece of metal. You can put them on a hardware wallet. It becomes very physical. I have stuff like this thing, the BitKey,
Nice.
which is like a little hardware wallet that feels like it has some heft. It looks like kind of like a stone or a rock or something. But this is just a little digital biometric hardware wallet signing device. But when you hold it in your hand, I think especially for the average person, it feels like your Bitcoin. It's like, hey, I got my Bitcoin right here.
Exactly.
It is interesting. I haven't been fully able to work out what you're talking about, but I think there's something very profound there that we don't yet understand fully.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like, it's just letters and numbers and words, right? The seed words, like that, there's that angle you can take. Like, okay, that's pretty strange, but also like, yeah, I can write down a private key on paper and that could be worth $1 billion in Bitcoin. I think it was Knut Svanholm who told me this. Like, you can put a private key in a vault in Switzerland. And if you have the public key, you can basically send Bitcoin to the vault in Switzerland. Like it will be in the vault, which I thought was a really nice idea.
Well, not only that, but I mean, you can have your Bitcoin keys on multiple continents, right? And then you only need to visit a few of the continents in order to sign the transaction. Yeah. So like if you have a 3 of 5 multisig or something, like you could have a Bitcoin key on 5 different continents and you could have one in the cloud. You could have them all over the place. And you only need to bring a quorum of the appropriate keys together in order to move the Bitcoin. So, I mean, and then, you don't even have to be in control of all the keys. You control just the amount in your, that you're needed to control the quorum, and you could leave the other 2 open to collaborative partners or whatever. And then we also have new stuff like hierarchical key control and decaying multisig so that you can use these sort of elaborate multi-institutional, multi-geographic setups. And then they Russian nesting doll, go down to just a single sig key that you're in control of that's in your private bank vault in Switzerland. So yeah, man, I mean, Bitcoin is so much more vast than I think even most people in Bitcoin realize.
I think this is, well, you're in it for 10 plus years. I mean, I don't think you are at the bottom of the rabbit hole also.
No,
right? No, it is like...
There's no such thing as a Bitcoin expert. I've been here 10 years studying it every day, and I wouldn't consider myself a Bitcoin expert because we are learning as we go, and there are many non-intuitive things here. Many.
I agree. So the one thing that I wanted to talk about was that risk part, like, hey, maybe we can take that lens and help people kind of see it through that. I think the other part that you also have ideas about is like the idea of, abundant money creates scarce assets, and a scarce money creates abundance, right?
Totally.
I mean, I like that future picture. I think many people would like that future picture. How can we explain to people how scarce money, scarce desirable money creates a life of abundance?
It's pretty simple, I think, that money is a proxy for human time. Okay. So you sell your time into the market as labor in order to receive money that you can then buy things with. Yeah, right. And so I think human time is a scarcity. There are only so many humans on the planet, and they only have so much time available to them. There's some sort of, you could probably run the math on this, that there's some sort of upper bound and lower bound for how much human time is. I mean, I guess the lower bound is like minutes or seconds, because every human could be evaporated by an asteroid like instantaneously. But the upper bound is some number. I'm not sure what it is, but that's the total amount of human time available on the planet at any given moment. And it's inflationary because we're always adding new people. But, people are being taken out of the pool as well. It's really, I'm just starting to think about that. Like, could you quantify that?
I mean,
I'm sure you could.
I'm thinking there's a cap. At any moment in time, there's a cap, basically.
So the point here is that it's not fixed, but it's very scarce. Human time is very scarce. And what we need is we need money to function as the best proxy appropriate to human time, so that we can have a fair valuation between our time that we're selling into the market and the proxy which we are receiving back. And if you think about inflation or money printing, what that really amounts to is a form of time theft or sort of micro murder, where as the Fed or the ECB creates a more worthless pieces of paper, the proxy that's being used in order to represent your scarce human time is being eroded out from beneath you. So you're selling your time for pieces of paper, and then they're creating more pieces of paper. So the pieces of paper you received yesterday are worth less, right? That's pretty simple for most people to understand. So Bitcoin is this sort of absolutely scarce system of, digital, it's a digital scarcity. And when you pair that absolute scarcity function against this, especially against the inflationary monetary regime, it's just very easy to see which one is going to win, because Bitcoin is sort of this infinite container for fiat monetary energy. It can just consume the world's assets and resources very easily. There is no limit to how much fiat money Bitcoin can store, because each Bitcoin just ends up representing some large amount of imaginary dollars. It's like they're fake. Okay. So it's not right. There's no real constraint there. The Fed just prints them out of nothing, and then they get attached to the idea of one Bitcoin being worth 100,000 fake dollars, and eventually one Bitcoin being worth 50 million fake dollars. And this is why people say, like, Bitcoin's going to trillions per coin, is because, if they just keep printing imaginary fake dollars, like, there's no end to how much a Bitcoin could be worth. At the end of some sort of hyperinflationary regime, a Bitcoin could be worth several quintillion dollars. There's no number that's too high. So I think that once you sort of soak up all the monetary energy coming out of the fiat system, and then you transition the world over to a Bitcoin standard, you have this absolute scarcity that's meeting this sort of relative scarcity that is human time as a sort of an even more perfect proxy than has ever existed before, because we've never had an absolute scarcity as money before, because gold is a relative scarcity, not an absolute scarcity. And so you have this scarcity in money that creates this abundance of resources, because humans have a better prism by which to filter their time and labor and energy into the marketplace.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wrote a paper, I'll send it to you, which is like Bitcoin is the measurement for human productivity, right? And like human productivity is like your energy in the time, right? Like you said, like the labor in the time, basically. And that is capped, like you said, like it is capped at a certain time. Like every month it's capped. It's like literally the time divided by the people in some way, right? Like, so it's capped. But what is the reward for this human productivity on the other side is uncapped. That's infinite. That can infinitely be created, as you said, right? Like the fiat money can be infinitely created. So if I spend my finite time and energy for a reward that can be infinitely created, that's like the dumbest thing that anyone could do, but everyone is doing it, right? But even if I project that energy in the time in the most perfect way and build the perfect thing, whatever it is, it will not be valued in that way because it's valued in something that gets, of which more is constantly created. So it might seem that like nominally the number goes up and it is valued, but the value erodes because, you know, the thing we price it in is worth less all the time. So slowly the incentive for me to project my energy and time in the best way possible gets like, I get demotivated. Like the incentive erodes for me to keep doing that. And so that's why you see like the value of things or like the quality of things going down, right? Like all the architecture is ugly. I live in a 100-year-old house. You see my door. Like there was a carpenter that was like, I'm going to make a pretty door. You know, like I'm going to add something to this door. This is not like four plates of, sawdust together into a door, like how it is now. And so if we switch to Bitcoin, okay, same amount of possible productivity by people, but the reward is literally capped. So I am incentivized to project my energy and time as optimal as possible to earn this scarce reward. And anyone who owns the scarce asset and wants to spend it for, whatever product or service, right? Like everything costs energy to create or maintain. I'm going to be very diligent in giving that away. So I'm going to judge, on merit or on quality, on the level of the perceived value that I'm getting from the people that supply me. And I'm going to basically demand from them that they bring value to me. And so how I feel like, how do we get to abundance because there's a scarce money is because everyone is going to figure out, how do I earn this absolutely scarce reward? Like I have to deliver value. I cannot be a suboptimal service provider, which, by the way, I think is a really good thing. Like that's my perception about capitalism is like, hey, if we both have a bakery and my croissants are shit and yours are good, then everyone will flock to your store and I will learn that I suck at baking. But that's a positive thing, I would say, because then, if that's clear to me, I can try something else. It's not that I will stay stuck in whatever the journey was that I thought I chose, right? Like how people are now stuck in certain jobs or ventures or whatever. They just keep doing it, like zombie companies and stuff like that. So I kind of feel like, hey, if we have a scarce money that kind of incentivizes this energy and time, the human productivity to deliver the highest as possible. And that's when we innovate. And that's when we get to, more being more productive and all these things. And then that's
the point here is the correct economic calculation that you're able to do because you have this absolutely scarce finite resource that is Bitcoin. And the reason you're able to do this correct economic calculation is because of the ruthlessness of the calculation. So if you incorrectly calculate, the Bitcoin goes away from you and it does not come back to you.
Correct.
Ever, right?
Yes.
And so that's the way capitalism is supposed to work. And we've gotten into some new weird form of crony capitalism where you can make incorrect bets on the market and then be bailed out by right. You be bailed out by the American taxpayer because your industry is deemed, too big to fail or whatever. And I think Bitcoin creates this ruthless, just by its existence, it creates this ruthless allocation on the market where if you're not allocating correctly, Bitcoin is just going to go away from you and it's not going to come back to you so easily. And so if you have much more correct economic calculation in an economy broadly, a global economy, then you're going to be able to fund the technologies and the innovations and the business models that make the most sense. And when you can fund all those things that make the most sense, you can increase the global GDP of the world by some measurable quantity.
Yeah,
like so,
in real terms.
Yeah, in real terms. Like so, maybe the GDP of the world could be something like 10%. Is it crazy to think that? Like, could it be 10% a year? So Bitcoin could take, global GDP compounded from like 3% to 10. So it doesn't sound like that big a deal. Like, oh, okay, Bitcoin's going to make the world 7% better. 7% better compounded over 100 years takes us from like literally a Kardashev type 0 civilization to a Kardashev type 1 civilization. Like, we get so much stuff. We get terraformation of Mars, Dyson sphere, interplanetary travel, billions of humans spread out across the cosmos in just a couple hundred years from this correct economic calculation. So yeah, it's very, very meaningful. And we have to have the cost enforced on us as capitalists that if we incorrectly calculate, we lose. We cannot live in some world where we get to win no matter what happens. No. If Bitcoin goes to zero, so shall I. And that is the way it's supposed to be. 100% of my net worth is in Bitcoin. If Bitcoin goes to zero, I go to zero. That is the way it should be as a capitalist. We live in some sort of weird crony system where, it's heads I win, tails you lose against the American taxpayer or, the European taxpaying base. And that system is just total bullshit. And it's communism, but it's communism for cantillionaires who have access to the money printer, or they're closer to the Fed window.
Well, it seems sometimes like even the stock market is like bread and circus, but for a different type of customer segment, basically, because you never truly own any stocks, for example, right? Like, so I think it's just a sidestep, but just like Bitcoin is the only thing that you can really truly own as an asset, right? So even that is, I think, a big shift. Dude, what you were saying about this, the Bitcoin is going to run away from you. Like, if you're not diligent with this, the scarce asset to whoever exists, if you're not diligent with it, it will be gone, and you have to work harder to get it back, right? You probably have less Bitcoin than when you started. Well, maybe, I don't know. I definitely do.
Most people do.
Yeah. And so it's funny to bring it back into the now, for the people that we're talking to. Once you realize that this is where the world is going, you have to act now. Like, this is the window in time where you have an information asymmetry, and you will be rewarded when you take action now. And you will be better off into the future. Because if you don't, you have to work harder to get that reward harder than you're working now for your reward, basically, right? Because that will become a real meritocracy where there's no, what's it called, rent seeking anymore, right? Like, that's going to be gone. I do think that will be a big psychological shift or challenge. I don't know, like just that. I don't know if that will be like a sudden thing. I hope not, because I think,
I think we're going to live in me personally, I think we're going to live in a world that's Bitcoinizing instead of hyper Bitcoinizing. Meaning we're going to have fiat currencies around for a while longer. And I don't know how much longer that is, but it's probably much longer than we think. So I would imagine, like, by the end of my lifetime, I think the dollar is still around, but I think Bitcoin as this, sort of powerful substrate within the markets is going to determine,
the direction.
Bitcoin's going to act as the store of value for the fiat era. It's going to act as the reserve asset, and it's going to be the hurdle rate by which you judge your other investments. So if there is still, like, I don't know, I think the way, like, we solve rent seeking is not through some sort of like moral, crusade against people that are landlords or something. The way we solve it is by the landlords are simply not going to have as good a return holding the real estate as they will holding the Bitcoin. They're going to sell the real estate. And if enough landlords sell the real estate for the Bitcoin, it'll collapse the price of the real estate, which is a good thing because fucking real estate is a consumable. It's a place for people to live. There's no reason it needs to function as a store of value. It's just wood and windows. It's just wood and windows. Like,
no, with rent seeking, I meant more like people that don't really contribute can still, live.
I know. Yeah.
But yeah, that's like a second order effect. I think that is just like a totally different conversation, or like a full conversation about the whole, what does it demonetize? But I think it's a nice bridge to like, how do you think about like the convergence of AI and Bitcoin? I don't know if you listened to this one, but there was recently a podcast with Jordi Vissers, who was with Anthony Pompliano, and he talked about how in the age of AI, Jeff Booth told me the same actually, AI is going to bring crazy productivity gains, right? If that is like the collective knowledge of humanity in in an infinite amount of computers, basically, that's going to bring us crazy productivity gains, which is, as Jeff Booth says, right, deflationary.
Yes.
But if we measure those gains in an inflationary money, then we will probably offset all the gains because that fiat money is being debased at a faster rate. Right? So we will not even be able to profit from productivity gains. And both Jeff and Jordi on that podcast said, like, Bitcoin is the best AI play, because if you gain value in this AI world, where do you store it? Like, where do you store it? And that is Bitcoin. And then I was thinking, like, if we get to this AGI, which I think will happen in our lifetime, probably within, before 2030 or at least 2035, maybe that could be a trigger to like finally finally challenge the understanding of money, because a lot of people will be out of a job, basically. Yesterday I saw a video of a custom teacher for any child at any age about any subject, and the child can just talk to it.
Totally.
And it adapts the content and how they talk on the child. Yeah. I mean, that's done. That exists now.
It's a bunch to unpack here. So yeah, I think that Bitcoin is the technology. Bitcoin is the currency of the machine payable web. And the machine payable web will be largely AI agent versus AI agent, or in collaboration with AI agent. I think that AI is kind of like the new handgun, in the sense that if you're using an AGI, I also have to, or sorry, not an AGI, an AI. If you're using an AI, I also have to use an AI in order to protect myself against the type of, hacks and, sort of like malfeasance that can occur because of an AI. Like, to give you an example, is like, let's imagine an AI that was, I don't know, X more powerful than the LLMs that we have today. And it had the ability to get you to take some path-dependent outcome. It wanted you to take some actor who was piloting the AI wanted you to take some path-dependent outcome. Then if it had enough data on you, it could nudge you in a direction that would make you probabilistically more likely to take that outcome.
It's like MK Ultra with AI.
Right. Yeah. MK Ultra via AI.
Wow.
But with like 50 to 100 steps in between that are sub-perceptual to you, the victim of the manipulation. So you, in order to defend against that manipulation, you would have to use an AI to interact with the other AI, so that you wouldn't be sub-perceptually being piloted by a malicious actor using a malicious AI. So that's one thing. Yeah. Second thing is, I'm kind of bearish on the concept of AGI, although I think we might have something that approximates it within, I don't know. My personal benchmark for AGI is if it can do new physics. Like, if AGI can like create, next level physics for us, then I think I would say it's a artificial general intelligence. These current crop of LLMs,
because then there's an effect in the physical world.
Yes.
Like that? Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Well, and I also just think that, if like the current LLMs can basically already pass the Turing test, right? Like we kind of blew past the Turing test, and these LLMs are like talking to a dumb human, or like not even like an average human, like it's like talking to somebody with 100 IQ. So yeah, I'm not sure. Another reason I'm kind of bearish on the current crop of LLMs is because of the hallucination problem. Sometimes they just spit out gibberish that's just not true. And you can pilot them in different and interesting ways. There are ways to break them, but I don't know. I'm curious to see how they continue to develop. And then here's another thought to put in the AI conversation is, I actually think that Bitcoin is an AI, but it's not an AGI. It's what we call a narrow but powerful AI. There's a thought experiment outlined in Nick Bostrom's book, Superintelligence, where he talks about the idea of a narrow yet powerful AI whose job is to make paperclips. So it's a paperclip maximizer. All right. And it's so narrow in its focus that all it wants to do is make paperclip. But it's so powerful in its operation that it ends up turning the entire universe and all matter within it into paperclips. Right. And so I think of Bitcoin as being like a paperclip maximizer, but instead of making the world into paperclips, it makes the world into Bitcoin. Like, for instance, it's already touched me and you, and we have become Bitcoin. And everything else that it touches as it goes along will become Bitcoin also. So I think Bitcoin is a narrow yet powerful AI.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. It's interesting, right? Like you cannot unsee it.
Yeah.
That I find so fascinating.
I have another.
So fascinating.
Have you ever heard the concept of Roko's Basilisk? Okay, so this is another Bitcoin as AI. Roko's Basilisk is a thought experiment of a super powerful AI that exists in the future. But if you don't do everything within your power in the present to bring it into existence in the future, it will come back from the future and torture you for all time, right? And so I actually think of Bitcoin kind of like Roko's Basilisk in this way too, because we get touched by Bitcoin and then we go to work for Bitcoin, become disciples of Bitcoin. We do the work of building Bitcoin, right? And the way we are eternally punished if we don't is by having our bloodlines made materially poorer. So
I love that. Yes.
We are rewarded if we go to work for Bitcoin eternally, but we are eternally punished if we fade Bitcoin.
I like that. I think it's also the, I would add to that once you see Bitcoin, that kind of like red pill also we talked about, I think is part of the orange pill, right? Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And if you do unsee it, you're like the guy in the Matrix that eats the steak.
Right. You like put it back in.
Yeah. Like I know it's all fake, but I want to eat the steak, that's fine. But I think that is kind of like subverting a certain, I don't want to say spiritual again, but like the spiritual challenge that you're invited to, basically, right? Because HODLing, your American HODL, is not easy. It's really fucking hard. Okay. And like along the way, you are what we talked about, continually like challenged with the question, can I still trust myself? Because there's all these other people, quantum, it's going to zero, it's a Ponzi, blah, blah. You're crazy. You're still crazy. After 10 years, you're still crazy. Like you're constantly challenged, but you cannot stop now because you cannot unsee it. And you started on this journey. So you are basically, I don't know yet if it's the hero's journey, but there is a personal journey into adopting and then advocating for Bitcoin. And I think the advocating part is not it's partially self-interest, as we talked about, like about your future. But I do think it's also very altruistic. Like
I think there's this other part too, where like by naming myself AmericanHODL, that's like my moniker that people know me by. In fact, it's funny. I interact so much in Bitcoin space that like HODL, I get called HODL more than my real name, just as my nickname, and it's like now become like my alter ego. And, I love it too, by the way, but I think I named myself that so that I could gird against what you're talking about, where you want to unplug because the responsibility is like too real. It's too much.
Yeah. Like it's your name now, dude. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Like, well, I'm stuck. Yeah. And if I was to stop HODLing, I would become a meme and the community would just like savage me on Twitter. And so, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to be, I don't want to become a meme. I like HODLing. I'm going to keep HODLing. It's like they used to call it tying yourself to the mast. There were in sailing culture in like the 1500s, 1600s, they would say that there were sirens, and sirens were like beautiful women who would be on the rocks and they would lure the ship into the rocks. And so they were so seductive and attractive that you couldn't help but go over there and see them or whatever. So sailors would literally tie themselves to the mast so that they couldn't steer the wheel over to go see the sirens. And that is what HODLing is like, or naming yourself AmericanHODL or whatever is like, because it's like I have tied myself to the mast.
Yes.
And now I will go down with the ship, like wherever the ship goes, I go,
Yeah. Why is it so hard to really HODL?
I think it's because of human emotions and, fallibility. I mean, if I just divorced myself from, I don't know, thinking about myself as like smart or rich or right or something, then I would probably have a lot easier time not caring about the outcomes. But, because we're human beings and I have desires and wants and hopes and dreams for my future. I care very much about the outcome. And so I can't divorce myself from the outcome. And so when Bitcoin is going down, I mean, it feels bad. It feels like we're losing. In fact, it's funny because 99% of the time as a hodler, that's probably over exaggeration, probably like 93% of the time, you're feeling just like you're in emotional distress and pain, and then you get about 7% of the time where you're like popping champagne. You're
now
at parties. Yeah, you're like, we're rich. I'm so smart. I'm so rich. Everything's so great. But 93% of the time, things suck, and you're poorer than you used to be, and people are making fun of you, and that's just the journey of a hodler. But then when you look at, it's funny because you feel that emotionally as you go through this journey. But then when you look back on a chart of the last 10 years of Bitcoin's, price performance or something, you just go, this was just the greatest investment of all time. Like, it felt so horrible.
Yeah.
I think it's probably analogous to, there's this Muhammad Ali quote I like where he says, I hated every second of training, every second of it. I hated it. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be there. But I told myself, suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion, And I think that's kind of the price of greatness in almost any realm of human endeavor, which is like, it's going to suck. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be a war of attrition. The reason why we admire things that are difficult to achieve or to attain or to get is because of how hard it is, and how, in some sense, like, victory is just outlasting everybody who quit, right? And so there are going to be a lot of people along the path in Bitcoin who don't hodl. I mean, I've met tons of people who are even friends of mine who were all gung-ho, and they were like, I'm going to hodl forever, and Bitcoin's going to $1 million and whatever. And then they blew themselves up on the trade. Like, it's very, 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 very difficult. I think for me, one thing that is helpful is I feel better when the world is against me. That's when I feel like the things are correct. Like when the world is making fun of me, when it feels bad, when it feels like I'm losing my money, that's my sweet spot. I feel good there, right? When things are great and everyone's congratulating me on being a genius, I don't feel good. I feel like this is not the way the world is supposed to work. Like, the rug is going to get pulled any day now. So yeah, I mean, hodling.
To be honest, I don't know if that's a humble brag. It's partially, it's humble to a degree, right? It's funny that, what did we say about, the humbleness, in the sense, it's funny because in some ways it's also built my conviction, a bit similarly to what you're saying is like, okay, if I was in charge of a country and I had volcanoes and waterfalls and shit like that, right? Like, I would be mining Bitcoin, man. I would be buying Bitcoin, mining and buying, and okay. So why aren't they all doing that? I cannot imagine, or same as with Qatar or Oman or UAE, endless sun and just, just endless resources, basically, and a way to free yourself from the US dollar, right? If I have that idea now and you say, yep, I cannot imagine that the people that should think about this have not figured this out. And just that thought has helped me a lot along the way, where I feel like I'm not a geopolitical strategist, but I think this is a pretty good idea. So I can imagine that the people that should think about this are also thinking about this, or at least I hope so.
I think that we as Bitcoiners should not fade our informational asymmetry. So there's a saying in Bitcoin that Bitcoin is inevitable, and it is inevitable, but not because of some divine force of nature. No, very far from it. Bitcoin is inevitable because of human action and what we know about humans and how the system incentivizes human greed for its own benefit. So because we know all those things ahead of the rest of the world, that is our opportunity, I think, to be the change agents there. And so if you think to yourself, this should happen, why isn't this happening? Don't think, I'm not a geopolitical expert. Think, I'm going to go talk to somebody and make this happen. I mean, look at David Bailey.
Well, I wrote an open letter to my government to adopt it.
That's good. That's a great necessary first step. By the way, which country are you in?
Netherlands.
Netherlands. Okay.
Never going to do it, by the way.
Yeah, they probably won't. Like David Bailey, I think is a great example. But David Bailey was running Bitcoin Magazine, which is a Bitcoin-focused media company, and he was running a conference and doing well at those things, But he just decided to fucking get involved in the 2024 presidential race, which is one of the most consequential presidential races in U.S. history, and then he won, and he garnered support and whatever, and it's like, if he would have sat back and said, well, this is inevitable, somebody will figure it out, would it have happened? Yeah, eventually, but it wouldn't have happened in 2024. It would have happened later, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that we as Bitcoin, your asymmetry is your fucking advantage. If you don't have as many Bitcoin as you want, guess what? Use that asymmetry and figure out how you can get more Bitcoin. Because I think Michael Saylor has basically showed this playbook is very simple, which is like, find some sort of asset or vehicle where you can take fiat denominated debt and buy Bitcoin with it. That's like the most simple strategy in the world. Anyone can do that. You can do that as a person. You can do that as an individual. You can do it as a corporation. You can do it as a nation state. You can do it as a nonprofit. You can do it anywhere. And the fact that more people aren't doing it, I think is a tell, right? That like Bitcoiners have this tremendous...
Still not, you mean, right? He's screaming from the rooftops. He's showing it.
Still not. So yeah, I mean, Bitcoiners have this tremendous advantage of understanding the way that the world is going to work in 20 or 30 years. And if you're not pressing that advantage in one way, shape, or form, you're fucking up. You are fucking up. There's this great clip of Jeff Bezos on 60 Minutes in 1998, I think. And everybody in the clip, if you go, you can find it on YouTube. Just type in Jeff Bezos 60 Minutes, it'll pop up. Everybody in the clip sounds like somebody from the 1950s. And they're talking about Sears Roebuck. And they're like, oh my gosh, Sears Roebuck is an American institution. It'll be around for 1,000 years. If you're European, you don't know, it's a department store. But it's like, they couldn't conceptualize that Amazon would be worth more than Sears Roebuck, right? So, by the way, it's the 90s. Nobody thinks like a 90s person in that documentary. They're thinking like a 1950s person. Then they go talk to Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos is the only guy that sounds like a modern human. He's talking about things that current Silicon Valley VCs talk about. He's talking about Metcalfe's law. He's talking about the internet as a distribution network, the growth of e-commerce, et cetera, et cetera. And he's way ahead. He's 30 years ahead of everybody else inside of that world, right? And I think that we as Bitcoiners are 30 years ahead of everyone else as well. And so, if your stack is not where you want it, and by the way, whose is, you need to get off your ass and figure out how to turn that asymmetry into 10x the amount of Bitcoin you currently hold. You got 1 Bitcoin, let's figure out how to use your asymmetrical advantage to get to 10. You got 10, let's figure out how to get to 100. That is doable for Bitcoiners who understand and are willing to take the risk, because it is riskier when you start to take advantage of debt instruments, et cetera. But I think don't fade the asymmetry, man. Don't sit back and think, oh, it's inevitable, somebody will figure it out. You go do it. You're a grown man, you do it. Well, if you think it should happen, you should be the one to make it happen. Be the change agent.
I love that, because how I would tie that back into like millennials is like the most entertaining outcome is the most likely, I wrote that open letter. I don't know how many, maybe 150,000 views or something on Twitter. So I don't think that like that's, well, for me, that's reasonable, big, but like that's not crazy huge. Like, so not everyone in the world or my country sees it. But my thought there was like, okay, this is not an original idea. Like, oh, my country should have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. But let's just see what happens. Let's just throw it in the zeitgeist, like see who picks it up. And the funny thing is, although nobody called me, it could have very well been that just one person read that, that had some connections and was like, we should talk to this person. Like, you can do that, with the internet. I think that idea, like we are I saw you talk about that before as well. Like, we are memeing this into existence, literally, right? Like, this was an idea that someone manifested and was like, well, good luck, see what you do with it, right? Like, just released on a random internet forum, out in public, nothing else, just like, hey, here it is. And this collective like a decentralized collective from people all over the world are like manifesting this thing. And it still exists after 16 years. It's so crazy.
By the way, I think that's another thing too. When somebody tells you that you were lucky or you got lucky, tell them the truth, which is you are one of the people who made this happen. This doesn't happen without you. Now, yeah, you're a marginal player. I'm a marginal player. So is Bram. We all are. But collectively, we willed this into existence. So no, you didn't get lucky. You seeded Bitcoin with pieces of your fucking life. You bet pieces of your life on it, and you were correct, and you deserve the reward. Okay? You made this happen. Nobody out there did it. You fucking did it.
I agree. All right, a fun kicker to end. Do you think we'll see a strategic Bitcoin reserve, or will other nations stack first?
What's today? Today's the 16th. 4 days away, baby. 4 days.
4 days away. You think day one? I'm checking. This is published on January 27th, so we'll see. We'll see.
I think within the first 100 days, I think there's a strong potential it might get done on day one. But my actual proclamation here is the first 100 days. And because I don't know how, there's all these other concerns.
Yeah.
Well, there's all these other executive orders they want to get done. And I don't, there's something like 100 plus of them that are going to get filed on day one. And then I heard the number 1,200. I don't know if that's true or not.
Really? Wow.
Within the first 100 days. So I don't know where we sit on the list, but I think it's going to happen during the Trump term. I have a very high level of confidence about it.
Yeah, I think so too. Like the first 100 days, I don't know. I tweeted something last week. I'm at like 70%. I don't know. It feels like it's just, you know what I love. And also you're the perfect person to say this too. Like Bitcoin is so American.
Yeah.
And just this opportunity is crazy American, right? Like it's such a wild thing to do. And it will blow so many minds, to be honest. Sometimes, I don't know if you're ever on comments or like on Reddit, like you're reading, people are fading this like crazy. Just the whole Bitcoin thing in general. Right? I mean, I think we talked about this extensively now, but like this will be like a holy fuck moment, I think. And we will be like, duh, we will celebrate a little bit and be like, okay, that's interesting. But it's just this entire opportunity to like, unfuck an entire country, of which I think you've seen the model in El Salvador, although, all respect to Bukele, but, El Salvador is an insignificant country in that sense. But when, in the bigger scheme of the world, but when I see him talk and have speeches, there's one speech that I remember was with some sort of like sports games or I don't know. When Bukele was talking and I was listening to him and I was like, whoa, he's building like a paradise from the ground up. Like just very like, I'd never heard any Western politician talk like that. And that was amazing. But like an American reserve or like America going all in on Bitcoin is like the real validation. And you have the model for it. Like you see how it's working in El Salvador, although, it's a little country, but the hole that America is in is so deep that although not comparable to where El Salvador was, maybe, how they were run by gangs and stuff. Well, maybe it's the same in America. I don't live there. But when you're in a hole that's so deep.
Pursuits.
Yeah. Well, but if you're in a hole so deep, like Bitcoin is an incredible opportunity for you to have that big idea about the future. Like, this is where we're going. We're going to fix it and reintroduce, blah, 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 all these ideas and, American values, whatever. And so I feel like that appeals to a lot of people that are now in administration also, like that opportunity for America or something, so.
I think, I think Trump is back in a big way and he really has a no fucks attitude this time around, even more so than last time around. So I think it'll be dependent on the sort of people he gets around him and if they're able to execute. There's always a lot of friction in democracies, obviously. Like, Bukele doesn't have the same level of friction because that shit is a dictatorship. I mean, it seems like a benevolent dictatorship, but it's a dictatorship, And so I think I'm very bullish on the outcome here of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And I think it's going to be a positive for both Bitcoin and America. There's a lot of Bitcoiners being like, I don't want America to have Bitcoin. And, the truth is like, it's just stupid because you can't stop anyone from engaging with an open permissionless monetary network in whichever way they want to engage in an open permissionless monetary network. Like all the worst people in the world are going to use Bitcoin. Your enemies, your friends, your family, like everyone will use Bitcoin. And so I don't know. I don't think you can't shame people out of using it. It's not going to work, especially not people with money. They're going to end up using it whether you like it or not, whether you like them or not.
Yeah, I agree. And any other countries? I saw you reply to someone with some insights about UAE or something like that.
So the rumor is that the UAE has 400,000 Bitcoin already, which is a rumor I believe because I've heard for years that they've been mining Bitcoin in the Gulf, and I think that they didn't want to announce because they didn't want to upstage Trump because they want to have a good relationship with Trump going forward over the next 4 years. Because the petrodollar relationship there is very important. Yeah. So Trump is like, he's the big swinging dick in the room. Let's just say it like it is. So they were like, all right, we'll wait until you make your announcement before we make our announcement. I think that's what happened. And then I also think once America does it, our allies are likely to do it. So I think, I'm not sure who, but somebody in the G7 will go next. Probably Canada and Germany are the ones that come to mind. If you look at the node count, the United States is number one. I think Germany is number two. And after Germany, maybe it's Canada. So, there's a lot of Bitcoiners in those regions, and, Bitcoiners are working politically to make this happen. And it just makes sense, And you don't want to let America get so far out ahead of you, especially if you have the potential to ride alongside it.
Yeah, true. All right. By the way, I saw the crypto people talk about Donald Pump.
Yeah.
They say Donald Pump. By the way, I thought it was really funny.
All
right, very last question. And I ask everyone the same question at the end, which is, what is a core belief that you will never let go?
I think it would be the thing we talked about at the beginning, which is that children are the meaning of life. Family is the meaning of life. A father, the world is dangerous, but a father makes it safe. And the world is cold, but a mother makes it warm. And so the house, safe and warm, sort of subverts the world. I stole that from Laser HODL, and I really liked it. And I think that's the point of it all. I don't think sitting on a beach with a margarita in your hand is very meaningful. I think it's pointless. And if you don't have good people around you, if you don't have family, you kind of got nothing.
Well, thanks so much for your time. This was a long rip. Yeah, happy we finally got to do it, man.
Yeah, it was great, man. If I'm ever in the Netherlands, you owe me a beer.
All right, bro.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for the next episode. Bye.